My name is Coleman Hughes. I'm a writer and host of the Conversations with Coleman podcast. In today's world, we can't escape discussions about race. It's an obsession that's taken center stage in our culture. But I can't help but wonder, why? Why is our society so fixated on this topic? In my new book, The End of Race Politics, I argue for a return to the ideals that inspired the American Civil Rights Movement. I reveal how our departure from the colorblind ideal has led to a new era marked by fear, paranoia, and resentment. By fixating on race, we lose sight of what it means to be truly anti-racist. I believe that a colorblind society is possible, and in the End of Race Politics, I provide the intellectual tools to make it happen. Join me on this journey to rethink the conversation. The End of Race Politics is available for pre-sale now. Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Coleman. My guest today is Nick Gillespie. Nick is a prominent libertarian journalist and commentator best known for his work at Reason magazine, where he's been for about 30 years, I believe. In this episode, we discuss Nick's experience getting engaged at the recent Burning Man. We talk about psychedelic drugs, the promise they hold, as well as the dangers they contain. We talk about the evolution of the libertarian movement in America. We talk about how we should message about drugs to kids. We talk about the differences between MDMA, psilocybin, and LSD. We talk about why trust in government has declined, and much more. So without further ado, Nick Gillespie. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I love your couch and your furniture.
Oh, well, yeah.
It's so personal. It really is you.
It's really me. It's really WTF Studios. And you'll probably see lots of other podcasts that use this exact same backdrop. Mm-hmm. But aside from those tiny, inconvenient facts, it's totally me.
Yes.
So first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
On getting engaged.
Thank you.
At Burning Man.
Yeah.
If people aren't aware of this, there's a beautiful video on Twitter. Your fiance Sarah, who I've met, is wonderful, and you got engaged at the what may go down as one of the most, if not the most famous Burning Mans, I guess you would say, Burning Men.
Yeah, Burning's Men.
Burning's Man. Yeah, it's like attorneys general.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing that Burning Man hasn't been degendered yet, right? I mean, it's been around since the late 80s.
Oh yeah,
and
it's not burning they, them.
And it's also, it is still all about fire, which is really interesting. So, this
which
year...
is sort of like anti-environmental in some way?
It's not. I mean, it's an interesting question because this year there were also people protesting, environmentalists protesting, the road in. And it takes place in the middle of nowhere in the desert on federal Bureau of Land Management land. And some environmentalists were protesting the fact that billionaires use this as a playground and that it's not carbon neutral. And, billionaires, of course, aren't driving in, they're flying in and things like that. But without becoming a cliched evangelist for it, it's a fascinating event, that has now been around. I think this was its 37th year. But what's really interesting about it is that everybody who thinks they have it pegged, that it's like, this is a bunch of woke socialists or tech bros or drug addicts or this or that. It can't be contained by that. And one of the most interesting things for me, and I'm a professional libertarian in everything I do. I try to extrude through some kind of libertarian Play-Doh dye, into something. But it's really a celebration of kind of human freedom and surplus wealth because, everything gets done once and then it disappears. But the fire element is really a big part of it. And everybody there is environmentally conscious. And one of the most amazing things about it is, you go in, you bring everything you need, because this is a part of the desert where there are literally not even bugs for the most part. There's no vegetation. There's nothing. It's completely dead as an environment, and you take everything out. So everybody there is very environmental in the way that they think about stuff, but they also have fun, and they're not pretending this is, that it's a carbon neutral activity to burn a bunch of stuff in the middle of the desert. So It's very interesting that way.
You make a good point that it brings together lots of different kinds of people in an unpredictable way and can't be caricatured. Something about that, I think something about psychedelics may do that.
Yeah.
So I watched your 30-minute documentary, documentary produced by Reason, right?
Right. Yeah, by Reason.
About psychedelics, the psychedelic, what's it called?
We call it Welcome to the Psychedelic Renaissance.
Psychedelic Renaissance.
You know, the starting point we went to in June, there's a group called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which has been around since like the mid to late 80s. And they've been working to, among other things, get FDA approval of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD and a couple of other indications, which is getting close. I mean, they've been saying this for a number of years, but it's like, you know, next year it's going to be approved, et cetera. But they had a big conference in Denver called the Psychedelic Sciences Conference, and it brings together doctors, therapists, researchers, activists, artists, and, you know, everybody, thrill seekers and whatnot. And there were 13,000 people this year. Everywhere around us, psychedelics, you know, they've been decriminalized or legalized in places like Colorado and Oregon. The FDA is, you know, the MAPS is in stage 3 trials, which is the one before you get approved by the FDA for their system of using MDMA to help people.
Am I right? Am I remembering right that they were given breakthrough drug status?
That was actually psilocybin, and that's a different company of a more traditional pharmaceutical company named Compass, which is also in stage 3 trials using psilocybin or mushrooms for similar things, I think for anxiety and depression. And so like, and then culturally, you know, you can just see all around us, things are popping up where psychedelics are getting a second and longer look. Similarly to Burning Man, the psychedelic space is one where, you know, you kind of assume it's like it's a bunch of, you know, burnt out old 60s cases who are, you know, huffing the fumes of Timothy Leary's corpse or something, and young people who just want to get high or trip. But it's so much more robust than that. And at this conference, you know, the first two big outside speakers were Jared Polis, the liberal Democratic governor of Colorado, who's behind, you know, who's backed a lot of this stuff, you know, and is governor of a state that was, you know, is generally considered the most successful at legalizing recreational cannabis. But then it was Rick Perry, you know, the former governor of Texas, who's a hardcore Republican, who was in Trump's cabinet, and he's all about MDMA-assisted therapy and other psychedelic therapy for veterans and victims of sexual trauma. And that kind of, you know, it's exciting to see, you know, people who normally aren't in the same room unless that, you know, it's Thunderdome, you know, actually kind of talking and conversing.
So there was an article in, I guess it was it New York Magazine? I think it was New York Magazine, or the New Yorker rather, about this kind of dinner series that both you and I have gone to in the past, hosted by Pamela Paresky. It was called A Club for the Canceled.
Right.
And there was a line that I actually laughed out loud. It goes, quote, "On average, the group probably leans right, at least when compared to the rest of the city. But a few socialists go, along with a contingent of libertarians such as Nick Gillespie, who come ready for debate. Quote, and you bring drugs," Nick added.
Yes. Well, so that is our role. Libertarians are, you know, we're not the most popular or the most populous, you know, subculture, but we know what people want.
Yeah, I mean, I laughed out loud when I read that, because having been to those dinners, I know they're not dinners that other people are generally bringing drugs to. Like, you were just kind of telling on yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and to be honest and to be forthright, I don't think I've ever done drugs at any of those things. I don't drink anymore, so it's, you know, I don't know. I'm a bad faith libertarian in a lot of different ways.
Did you quit drinking recently?
I quit drinking in 2019.
Why?
Because I was drinking too much, and it was becoming, you know, the AA parlance. And I don't attend AA, but I've found AA useful in various things. But my life had become unmanageable, primarily not because of drinking, but the drinking was exacerbating everything. So I do other kinds of drugs, but I don't drink anymore.
Do psychedelics did psychedelics help the transition from drinking to not drinking?
They do, for a lot of people. And
I mean, I've even heard people that just kind of naturally lose interest in drinking without having had a classical problem as a result of doing psychedelics.
That's very common. And, LSD was synthesized, I guess, in the late 30s, and then it kind of started getting used towards the late 40s. In the 50s and early 60s, before it was prohibited really started coming under a lot of negative scrutiny from the government, especially, one of its primary applications was to help cure alcoholism or treat alcoholism. And the guy who coined the term psychedelic was a British-born doctor and researcher named Humphrey Osmond, who ended up in Saskatchewan for much of his life. And he had these fantastic results treating problem drinking. He gave LSD, or he treated Bill W., one of the founders of AA, who was an evangelist for psychedelics and LSD for a while before the AA people told him to cool it. But yeah, I didn't. In my case, I'm half Irish and half Italian. So like I'm already, 2.5 steps behind everybody just coming out of the womb. And on the Irish side in particular, very stereotypically, I only know my family line back through my father's father or my grandfather. He was an alcoholic or a problem drinker. My father was, I was, so it was in the cards to stop. And I would say, for me, psychedelics didn't help me stop, but it's, they probably helped me not feel a need to drink.
What's your favorite psychedelic drug and why?
It's LSD, and it's kind of like there's, within the psychedelic community, there's a lot of, endlessly proliferating number of subgroups, and because, humans are kind of fractal, so like every part of us and every subculture we do contains all the problems and all the promises of everything else. So, whenever you get into a subgroup, whether it's musical or, literary or whatever, like people start creating dumb distinctions. But within the psychedelic world, there's a lot of like natural versus lab and this and that and ritual versus, kind of just doing stuff. I like LSD.
Hold on, LSD. Oh, so natural versus lab. That would just be on the
LSD,
lab side by default.
It's based on a fungus that's been around for a long time. But it was synthesized. It was synthesized in a lab, in Switzerland by a guy, who is. It's the absolute, he's such the difference of like a dirty, smelly hippie. It's comical, really. But in any case, I like LSD because it's really, it's powerful, it's potent. It's, I've had, just a series of, both mundane and fascinating experiences on.
Are you dreading the busy holiday season and wondering how you'll manage to eat healthy with your packed schedule? Well, look no further. Factor, America's leading ready-to-eat meal delivery service, is here to keep you energized and on top of your game. Imagine having chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals at your fingertips for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. With Factor, you're not just saving time, you're embracing a lifestyle that allows you to enjoy delicious, nutritious meals while ticking off every item on your to-do list. We all know that holiday prep can leave us with little time to cook, let alone eat healthy. But with Factor, you can bypass the grocery store chaos and forget about the endless chopping and cleaning. Relish in the luxury of fresh, never frozen meals that only need 2 minutes in the microwave. Whether you're craving gourmet or calorie-conscious options, Factor has over 35 weekly meals to suit your tastes and dietary preferences. And for special occasions, treat yourself to Factor's Gourmet Plus options featuring exquisite ingredients like broccolini, truffle butter, and asparagus. Even if you're on the go, Factor's Lunch to Go offers effortless, wholesome meals like grain bowls and salad toppers, perfect for those busy days. Plus, with over 45 add-ons including breakfast items and wellness beverages, you're spoiled for choice. So head to factormeals.com/Coleman50 and use code Coleman50 to get 50% off. That's code Coleman50 to get 50% off at Factor Meals. So I read Albert Hoffman's wonderful biography. I'm forgetting the name of it now. My Problem
LSD,
Child.
My Problem Child.
My Problem Child. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautifully written documentary about Hoffman, who accidentally discovered LSD as a Swiss chemist.
Right. Well, he accidentally discovered the hallucinogenic properties of it, right? Because he did it on purpose, and they were looking for, he was doing various iterations of it, and then he didn't realize he had ingested it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember in that book, he speaks of, I believe, 2 different occasions where he met Timothy Leary and had kind of really apparently spirited arguments with him about the proper path for LSD to be disseminated to the public. Now, Timothy Leary basically thought it should be dropped in the water supply. And Albert Hoffman vigorously disagreed with this strategy. He thought that there would be a huge backlash and that what it should go through the proper institutional channels, government, the medical regulatory bodies and so forth. I think with hindsight, Albert Hoffman was completely right. And at least on one telling, Timothy Leary's, radical strategy led to backlash, which kept it illegal for many, many decades. Would you agree with that analysis, or do you think it would have been banned either way? Yeah,
I think it would have been banned either way. And I think, having said that, though, Leary is a problem child, and in many ways he was a man child. I'm a big admirer of Timothy Leary for his public effect. I mean, I reviewed, about 10 or 15 years ago, Robert Greenfield, a journalist, wrote a biography of him. I reviewed it for the Washington Post. And it's, Leary on a personal level is fairly despicable as a person. But we don't necessarily, that's not the measure of, somebody's effect on the culture. But within the psychedelic world, and, there's people like Hoffman, who also, by the way, it's interesting that he changes, like everybody does this, like over the course of his life. He kind of changes his minds, or, you rewrite and revise your past without necessarily like leaving the track changes visible. So his attitude changes over time a little bit. And towards the end of his life, he became a little bit looser about things. But you don't expect a Swiss chemist who was working for Sandoz, which is kind of now Novartis, like to be like, oh yeah, you know what, like let's let it all hang out and everybody should just be doing acid all the time. But people like Aldous Huxley, who was one of the main figures who really kind of mainstream psychedelics in the 50s with the book The Doors of Perception. He was given mescaline for the first time by this Humphrey Osmond character who treated alcoholics and coined the term psychedelic. But those guys were like, you know what, we need to administer this sparingly and under certain controlled circumstances, either with a doctor or a priest. Leary comes along, and at first he was, a semi-respectable, psychological researcher, and he was doing, serious trials and stuff like that. And then at a certain point, something snaps, and he's like, no, I want to be the high priest. One of his memoirs is called High Priest. And he wants everybody, or a lot more people, to be doing psychedelics, but still kind of within the terms he would lay out. So he was kind of, it's interesting because he's not a control freak in the way that maybe Aldous Huxley or the early Hoffman is, but he's also not a total let it all hang out. And that's actually Ken Kesey, who had been a merry prankster, or he created the Merry Pranksters on the West Coast. He's the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and another book called Sometimes a Great Notion. He had gone to Stanford. He had worked in a hospital, mental hospital, where people were being treated with LSD, and he started taking it. He, far more than Leary, was like, yeah, let's literally put it in the water, and he would dose people at what were called the electric Kool-Aid acid tests in California, where the Grateful Dead played. And he became, he had to go on the lam. He ran away to Mexico for a while because he was, being prosecuted. He was much more radical still than Leary. So there's this continuum, and that tension continues. That's a big part of the Psychedelic Renaissance doc, is that almost everybody that we talk to, from Rick Doblin to people like Julie Holland, a psychiatrist and researcher, certainly people like Rick Perry, they're all like, we need to not repeat the problems that Timothy Leary kind of manifested or conjured. I agree with some of that. There's no question that Leary was a provocateur. There's a strong argument that you needed to. Like, we don't, and I say this, I mean, I realize you're like half my age. I just turned 60. We cannot appreciate how square and like repressed American culture was. And like, I don't, you're not going to change that by being like, you know what, we need to wear tighter ties and do more lab testing. Like the 50s and 60s, and there's much more of a continuity there. Like in post-war America, this is a big part of my larger kind of project, is that in post-war America, for the first time, a lot of Americans got rich, or they got richer than they used to be across every category. And they started to feel more empowered and say, you know what, like, fuck it, I am not going to live by the rules in a system where I don't really have a lot of choice. And, and this takes on different forms for, like, the children of European immigrants. It took on one form for blacks. It took on another for gays. It took on another for women. But there's this profusion of, I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm going to live more by my own rules after World War II, after the Depression, after the deprivations of war, and a growing, swelling economy. And I think when Leary seems insane now, but he was necessary, I think, in a profound way, to kind of crack the old America, in the same way that when we look back, I think, at early feminists and a lot of race, people discussing racial issues. Like, on a certain level, it seems insane now, or like so over the top, but the world they were confronting was...
There's like the Malcolm X of, Malcolm X of psychedelics, and Hoffman was more like a MLK.
Martin Luther King, very good. But, I mean, it's fascinating.
But consistently, I much prefer MLK to Malcolm X and Hoffman to Leary.
But you like Bayard Rustin.
Yeah, I love
right?
Bayard
and
Rustin,
and so when you look at somebody like him, he's kind of a mix of both, because he wasn't putting up with, and I don't want to diminish at all, like the idea that Martin Luther King was kind of like, a shuffling, go along, get along type of guy is insane. And he was triangulating off of, the Black Power movement and Malcolm X and things like that. But somebody like Rustin is, truly a radical. And like, some of his most radical work, was just in rejecting the draft and being a conscientious objector, as well as being openly gay without apology and without even really comment. So I don't know, it's more complicated, but I think it makes sense to think about characters like Leary and Ken Kesey. And again, there's a lot of issues there, but like, they were confronting a different America than the one we live in. And we live in a much better, freer, looser America, obviously with many problems, because these guys were willing to just really say, fuck it. Like, I'm going over the edge.
So the only 3 psychedelics I think I've done are psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA.
Yeah.
And
which did you like best?
By far, MDMA.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, MDMA, I've done the most of those 3, followed by psilocybin, followed by LSD, which I believe I've only done twice. And when people that haven't done any of them ask me, should I do them? Or would you recommend them? The only one I feel I can recommend without caveat and really at all is MDMA. And the reason for that is because among the people I've seen do MDMA and I've heard of do MDMA, the number of bad stories of like truly harrowing experiences is like very, very, very low single-digit percentage, possibly below 1%.
Right. Like
really kind of a rounding error on the experience, and it's usually appears to be because it wasn't pure MDMA.
Right. And by the way, I hate to sound like, a public service announcement, but one of the, I Reason magazine is, you know, very libertarian. We were established in 1968. In our first issue, which was like, you know, 4 pages of a mimeographed zine, essentially, you know, there were calls to end the war on drugs. One of the reasons to do that beyond everything else is just so that people aren't taking poison in the name of taking something else. And like a roundabout way of saying, like, you know, everybody should test their drugs, regardless of who they get it from, because until things are fully legal and the manufacturers and distributors are fully legally liable for the integrity of their product, you never know.
Yeah. So, so MDMA, and I've done MDMA not in the typical context of going to a rave, and I mean, I've done a small amount of that, but by and large, when I've done it with a small group of friends and just talked about our lives, kind of replicating without knowing sort of what you would be doing in an MDMA therapy session, like often talking about your past, processing your past in a way that for most people is probably only available to you in the context of a drug like MDMA. Yeah. Sorry. And I've noticed serious and lasting benefits from having done that. Now, personally, when it comes to psilocybin and LSD, I've had very fun experiences and horribly bad trips on both. Yeah. And I know of enough bad trips and enough horror stories with people that I don't feel I can actually recommend that you just do it, because I don't want to be responsible for someone that came back with a terrible experience. And so that's kind of, I mean, that's kind of my approach to recommending and not recommending this. Furthermore, hasn't been clear to me from LSD and mushrooms that I've seen a longer run benefit. Yeah. So I guess one question is how do you recommend people who have not at all tried these substances but are interested? What advice do you have to them about the differences between them, how to do them, and the caveats that you give?
Those are great questions. And, you know, I would start by saying, like, I really don't recommend anybody do anything. And I'm not, you know, that's not a cop-out. It's, I'm interested in your MDMA experiences because, you know, that all makes a lot of sense to me. And, you know, within the broad, I mean, this is true of all drugs, really of almost all experiences, but, you know, people talk endlessly about set and setting, and it's kind of, you know, part of the experience is what the properties of the drugs, but it's really much more so what's the environment you're doing them in and what are you expecting to get out of them and your kind of mindset going in. And, you know, I suspect you could do, if you replicated the kind of situation where you're hanging out with a couple of friends and you do mushrooms or LSD like you do with MDMA, you might have a similar type of experience, or more similar to that. But sometimes you never know. And with all of these substances, I would recommend, you know, I'm a big reader, so it's like my first step is reading about something and then talking to people and things like that. And regarding MDMA, there's a fantastic new book out called I Feel Love, which is a kind of cultural history of MDMA. And it's a wonderful way of like learning about the history of the drug. A couple years ago, a book came out called Listening to Ecstasy, which is by a Gestalt therapist who also uses ecstasy, MDMA. Ecstasy is, you know, another name for it, Molly, things like that. And he, you know, he talks about the mechanics of like, okay, this is how you might use it. These are the proper dosing. Those two books are phenomenal, you know, kind of introductions to what you can get out of MDMA. There are similar books like that, you know, and you know, and videos and things like that online for the other drugs. And, you know, the one thing I would say is like MDMA, I mean, psychedelics in general kind of tend to engender a recognition. And, you know, I was raised Catholic. I'm not, you know, Catholic anymore, but of course, you know, that's, you know, it's in me, right? You know, it's like a retrovirus or something. So, and I'm not overly spiritual, but, you know, part of the allure of psychedelics is a recognition that there is something unifying all of us, and that we all belong to the, kind of some similar entity. There's a oneness, and that we are, manifestations of individual manifestations of that. And that's a profound feeling. And, that is worth exploring, I think, whether you do it with drugs or philosophy or, God help us, politics and things like that. But there's a lot of, there's shelffuls of books that are really good. And they keep coming out, with more and more regularity. And I'm sorry, just as an add-on, part of growth, and this is true whether it's, chemically underwritten or not, is finding those harrowing moments. And I'm not saying everybody should go and have a bad trip, or whatever that means. And certainly, you really have to be careful. People who have a history of like bipolar or,
schizophrenia.
Yeah, and things like that. Like, these are powerful substances. I don't think they're as powerful as either the detractors or the proponents say. They're tools, they're like super duper aspirin, really. And, part of the rhetoric of the war on drugs is that on the one hand, you have, insane prohibitionists who say, if you take one puff of marijuana, you're going to start doing heroin, like that drugs are enslavers of human desire and autonomy. And, they make all of these, and, and that, like, if you're on LSD, you won't know where you are, and, you'll think you can fly by jumping off a building. And my fiance, Sarah Siskind, who is also a psychedelic comedian, has a great line about that, where she's just like, if you think you can fly, why would you go up to the top of the building? Why wouldn't you just take off from the street, right? But there's those horror stories that undergird so much waste and horrible things in America through the drug war. But that's mirrored by people like Timothy Leary and, the descendants of him, who are like, man, you take this, one dose of LSD, one trip, one this, one that, and like, you're cured. And it's like, no, it isn't like that. I mean, like, it's like it's like working out. You can have one great workout and you're like, okay. And then you got to go back to the gym the next day. And that's true with all kinds of discovery. But, individually, like growing as a person, sometimes you do, you have to look into the abyss and see what's looking back at you, or maybe you even take the dive over and see what happens.
I want to say two things. One, on the side of the bad experiences, I think there's a bit of an asymmetry there, because while the likelihood of those terrible experiences has been really exaggerated by the anti-drug forces, the likelihood is not zero.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
They
I'm
happen,
not saying.
Like the person that does acid and jumps off of something, that really does happen.
Vanishingly small, and
it's rare. Yeah. It's rare, but it's not so rare that I don't know examples of it from my own extended network of like, say, kids I went to college with. Right.
I mean, what happens, I think, a lot of the times when you look at those cases. But
that's something I think can be prevented by doing it in
Well, you should do it in a
prepared setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that doesn't mean...
Even if a social setting is not maybe necessarily controlled enough to totally... Because your friends might be idiots.
Yeah, no,
right?
Totally.
Especially if you're 18.
Yeah, I agree.
So there may be some, it's something to think about with, like, are you around truly responsible, at least one person that's truly responsible enough to prevent the tail end bad outcomes.
Yeah, it's, if you have a designated driver, you should have, what's a trip sitter or something like that for sure. And you need to be serious, you need to take all of this serious, even if your idea is to have fun and thrill. So one thing I will say is that, when you read the stories, like, the guy who founded Reason Magazine in 1968, apparently had a bunch of bad acid trips and and was schizophrenic. Like, he ended up, dying in a Veterans Administration hospital.
Yeah, that does happen sometimes.
But his mental problems, they can be exacerbated by psychedelics, but generally speaking, it isn't the substance
They can
itself.
open a door that, like, there's been a monster in your mind banging on a door, and psychedelics can open it. Yeah. And if you don't, if you're unlucky enough to not be able to kill the monster or somehow tame it, you could, I mean, these bad things do happen. Let's see, there's one other point I wanted to make. So I think that I mean, I see like lurking in what you're saying a little bit of this idea that difficult experiences can make you stronger, which is true. I think that is, I view the mechanism a little differently though, because I think it's like what it is that when happy, strong people have difficult experiences, they make them mean something in retrospect. And then they often tell themselves a story. Like I tell myself a story about how my mother dying when I was 18 was a very important growth experience for me, right? Now, does that mean I would actually prescribe someone's mother dying as a growth experience? No, I think retroactively you make it, as you say, you rewrite the life history and don't notice the track changes. That's kind of how I view like truly bad trips. Truly bad trips, like the few I've had are just like actually synonymous with deep mental illness. It's like what it is to be.
I mean, can you put a little bit of detail on that? Sure.
So I'll give you one example. The 2 times I've done acid, I had one fantastic trip and one terrible trip. And the terrible trip, I became convinced that one of my best friends in the world was trying to murder me like that night. So I became basically the like protagonist of a horror movie that I was creating fully out of whole cloth or out of like slightly bad vibes, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was visiting him at Princeton, and I escaped him by taking the train back to New York at midnight.
Right.
Like mentally, I felt I was escaping.
I have to say, I mean, we're both from New Jersey. The idea of tripping at Princeton kind of is a nightmare.
Honestly, I mean, that may have had something to do with it, frankly. Set and setting.
Yeah.
But with the caveat that it's a priori very difficult for the uninitiated and maybe even the initiated to predict how set and setting will influence the trip.
And,
so in some way it's a moot point for many people.
Yeah. And there's, within the broad psychedelic movement, people talk in a lot of different kind of vaguely woo-woo terms or whatnot, but people, a lot of people call psychedelic drugs medicine, and they'll say, well, the medicine knows where you need, what you need, and maybe you need like a bad trip or you need this, and it's that's a way of saying, it can be unpredictable.
I think that this is those kind of things are all kind of like bullshit platitudes that healthy people construct, and they should. I think you should actually reframe your past difficult experiences like that. That's what happy people do. Yeah. It doesn't actually make it
maybe
true.
Not happy. Let's say well-adjusted.
Well-adjusted.
Right?
That's exactly what I mean. Yeah. That's exactly what I mean. In any event, my bad trip was, it was what I have to imagine it's like to have 10 out of 10 paranoid schizophrenia for about 48 hours.
Yeah. It sounds terrifying.
Terrifying, right? So like I can come up with a story about how this was good for me.
Yeah.
I think that story is not true. And it's important to keep that in view so as to alert people to the real potential downsides of these things.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good story to tell. It's also to, in the same way that you don't try to run a marathon, like I've been running 5 miles a day for a week. Now I'm going to run a marathon, like, kind of work up to it, because you can't really, go as you can't push yourself to the limits until you've kind of defined who you are.
This is something I think is rarely discussed in the psychedelic community. I think so many of us, our first experiences were with the so-called heroic dose, right? The ultra high dose of these substances. That wouldn't be obvious as a prescription in any other scenario, right? Like if you were
maybe with like antibiotics or something like that, like where you're going to take a high dose.
Fair enough.
Your point is well taken.
But with any other psychoactive drug,
if you don't start drinking,
if you're getting your nephew drunk,
Bacardi 151, you start with 3 2
You give your nephew one beer, right?
Yeah.
And you work up to, because if they have a terrible reaction to 2 beers, well, then they don't need 10.
Yeah.
And I think that's I guess that norm probably started in the 60s, but I think that norm should be broken. I think people probably should start with smaller doses and work their way up to the heroic.
But
I do acknowledge the heroic dose. It's more than the sum of its parts. Like it can really do something. It can break something that needs to be broken in you.
Exactly the kind of scenario you're laying out for yourself and the way you've thought that through. Everybody needs to do that for themselves, for sure. I mean, it's really illustrative, and I'm getting a lot out of that. It's, the other thing to think about too is just like, nobody has to do these substances, right, in order to have personal growth. One of the reasons that things like MDMA, substances like MDMA are being used in therapy is because they do, kind of open up your ability to revisit the past, particularly trauma, in a way that is safe, so that you can actually experience and process it, in a more productive way. And so everything you're saying I find interesting, and I generally agree with. The other broad point is that, and this is something I write a lot about generational change, because I was born in the second to last year of the baby boom, and I kind of hate the baby boom, or I hate boomers, it's really the mindset of, when we talk about boomers, we're talking about the first 10 years of the baby boom, roughly, from 46 to about 56. But one of the reasons why psychedelics were appealing to boomers, I think, in the 60s is that the rhetoric around them, and there's some truth to this, I think, is that they dissolve structures of regimentation, oppression, or just ordering. So like, if you grew up in a world where it's like you were expected to be very male or very female, and there wasn't a lot of gray, it's all binary, where you had to look a certain way. There were only 2 or 3 social types. Yeah, everybody, you were like cookie cutters.
The Ron Swanson Parks and Recreation. There are 2 acceptable haircuts: crew cut and
and then it's like, so you want something that dissolves that and kind of gives you room to kind of experiment and try things out. That's a very different experience than I think people your age grow up with, where it's not, nobody's saying like, you have to do exactly this and you have to look this way, et cetera. If anything, it's like you can do anything you want. You can be anything you want. Like a lot of the structures, both large and small and banal, like, people don't learn how to, do handwriting anymore. People don't learn table etiquette. Like the number of agreed upon rules of decorum have disappeared. And it's kind of interesting to me when I talk to younger people about their psychedelic experiences, they're kind of different than mine, because for me, and again, I grew up lower middle class. I'm the grandson of immigrants, Catholic. Like, it was kind of an ordered universe. And so like acid is acid on, all of these things. And it's like, holy cow, I can live differently than my parents, and I can go to college. I mean, my father didn't even graduate high school, et cetera. Like, it's like, that's a different world than if you're growing up in a sandbox where it's like, if you can think it, you can do it. And younger people have, I think, a different experience on psychedelics, just as they do in many other parts of the world.
Right.
Of their lives.
So speaking of sort of young people and their introduction to drugs, I had DARE, which I forget what the acronym stands for.
It stands for drugs are really expensive. Drug abuse, resistance education. Yeah.
So it's basically when a cop comes to your 5th grade class
with a suitcase
dressed
full
as a cop
of drugs, right? Did you have that where they're
I forget.
I mean, that's one of the stereotypical things is like, they have a suitcase full of drugs and then they open it up and show you what different drugs look like. Yeah,
I don't know if that's that may backfire.
Oh, it definitely.
But basically, the cop comes to your classroom and just tells you all of the negative side effects and consequences of drugs, most of which are either exaggerated or
or just made up.
Exaggerated.
I mean, one of the things about MDMA is that it's going to burn holes in your brain or your spinal cord. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I should just add, I don't know what MDMA does if you do it every other day.
Yeah.
I have to imagine it's fucking you up.
Yeah.
And you should leave a lot of time between when you do it. So, but that kind of education, basically, they tell you all the downsides. You come away thinking, well, why would anyone even be tempted to do these, right? It's like you're describing it as if it's like broccoli that also kills you.
Yeah.
And the moment you realize that drugs can make you feel better than you've ever felt for short periods of time, and they didn't include that in the lesson, right, you begin to think, okay, what else are they lying about? And if you're any kind of smart, I think that kind of messaging, I don't know how well that messaging works. Maybe it works very well with certain people, but you know, just zooming out, every parent that has done drugs, I think, wonders how they should speak, if they should speak about drugs with their children, right? You have kids. How do you think adults should talk to kids about drugs?
Yeah, you know, this is brutal. I used to write a lot about kind of early parenting stuff at Reason, and we go through these cycles of what some people call hard parenting and soft parenting. And, you know, this is the difference between like Benjamin Spock, Dr. Spock and Bruto Bettelheim, for instance, or, you know, it's the difference between free range parenting and kind of tiger mom parenting type stuff, constantly going back and forth. And with, you know, with kids, you realize, you know, again, like you don't, you know, when your kid's starting to read, you don't give them Tolstoy or something like that. I think with drugs, as kids get older, you need to talk honestly about them, and first and foremost about drinking, you know, and I say that not only because of my family history and a kind of broader cultural history that I'm part of, but because, you know, alcohol is vastly more ubiquitous.
You can't choose to avoid it.
Yeah, you know, and I think part of the starting point is that, you know, certain things kids, you know, just aren't right for kids, or, you know, it is kind of like, you're in my house, you live by my rules, you know, and so like in this house, we believe in science and that kids shouldn't drink before they're 18 or 21 or whatever, or do drugs. And it's, you know, it's difficult because as a parent, there's a lot of noble lies that go into parenting. And one of the things, my parents have been gone for, I don't know, like 25 years. And as I get older, my kids are adults, they're in their 20s. You know, I wish I had recourse to them to tell them how much more I understand about why they acted the way they did towards me. So, you know, parenting is kind of, you know, the ultimate kind of project management, you know, hellscape, because you have to be honest with your kids on a certain level, and you also don't talk to them about certain things, because if that would be worse. You don't want to know certain things about your parents,
right,
you know?
Right.
But with drug education, I think what needs to be understood is that people, you know, part of the human condition is wanting to change your mental state at any moment. And that can be to get high or to get fucked up, to escape, to be obliterated, or to, you know, tweak your performance upwards, or you're feeling anxious. How do you pull that down a little bit? And that we have this pharmacopoeia in front of us, legal and illegal, or the government says licit and illicit. And you got to start to say, look, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be making decisions. And, you know, these things exist. DARE is a great example of how not to do it. First and foremost, by outsourcing it to schools, and then to law enforcement, and then to a rhetoric that just was shown, actually, this is going back like almost 20 years, the federal government under George Bush, of all people, insisted that drug education programs in schools need to be science-based, like they need to have studies that show results. And as a result of that, DARE, which was in more than half of all school districts, it was taken off the government-approved list because there was no good evidence that it had any effect on the use rates among kids. There were some where it may have actually helped increase it for women, for girls.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I don't think it had any effect in my time. It certainly had no positive effect.
Yeah, we need, we need to be, you know, and I think as a society, it's weird because, you know, we're very much in a kind of broad national funk, and have been for like the better part of a decade, I'd say. But, you know, in many, many ways, we're just a much more adult and serious society than we used to be. And I think that's happening with drugs, you know, because I know very few people, even in, you know, the drug legalization movement, and there's a version of that called the harm reduction movement, which is that the goal of public policy regarding drugs isn't to increase or decrease use rates necessarily, but it's to reduce the harms that come overall from prohibition or from drug use. Like, and how do you do that? And it turns out that, absolute prohibition doesn't always work. And, and it may be better to come up with ways to reduce the social harms through things like needle exchange programs or serious education about the benefits and the costs of drugs, that actually has better results. And I think we're having a better conversation about drugs than we've ever had. It's still ridiculous and woeful, but it's much, much better than it was certainly when I was a kid.
Okay, let's talk. You say we're in a societal funk, and presumably part of that has to do with that we've become a low trust society. And that's something you've paid a lot of attention to. You had a long piece about it in Reason Magazine in 2019. When you say we have gone from a high trust to a low trust society, what do you mean?
So one way of thinking about this, Gallup, the polling organization since the early 70s, has been measuring what they call trust and confidence in societal institutions. So they ask people, do you have, a lot of trust, some trust, little trust, or no trust in things like organized religion, government, including like the White House or the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary, big business, small business. They ask across a wide variety of things. And what's happened since the 70s, the combined average of that, and this is kind of, simplifying it, but it gets at the large point, about half of people in America had high trust and confidence in institutions, that these parts of our world were, the people running them were trying to do the right things most of the time. It's now, I was just checking before we talked, it's at an all-time low. It's at like 23% or 22%, that average. So it's dropped from around 50% to less than half of that since the 70s, in the past 50 years, say. We don't trust our neighbors, we don't trust our government, we don't trust our businesses, we don't trust our schools, we don't trust our experts as much as we used to. And that has real ramifications in society. Like, in general, you don't want to live in a low trust society, because if you think everybody is ripping you off and your government is ripping you off, it predictably, and there's political scientists and sociologists and economists have looked at this extensively, it leads to all sorts of bad outcomes. Like, it's harder to do business, right? If you don't trust the people you're doing business with, it raises the transaction cost. Because, like, if I don't think you're going to pay on time, I'm going to make you pay more and pay up front, which means everything gets more expensive. Like, credit goes out the window. We don't trust our government for a lot of reasons. And it's interesting to note, in the 70s, that was a moment where it became unavoidable that the government, the federal government, and in different ways, state and local governments, were just lying and bullshitting about stuff in ways big and small. And, to put a little bit of flesh on that, the government had been working to kind of manage the economy so that we would have a lot of growth and low unemployment. And then suddenly in the 70s, it became impossible, like things that economic theory couldn't make sense of. We had high unemployment and, very volatile growth, like where we'd have 5% growth one year and negative, a recession the next year. Inflation went up even as unemployment went up. And these things were always seen as inversely related. Like, on a most basic level, the government wasn't doing what we had thought it could handle. We saw in foreign policy and things like Vietnam, we couldn't do what we said we were going to do. You saw, absolute corruption and like secret governance in things like Richard Nixon and Watergate, and secret tapes that came out where he was saying one thing to the public and something very different in private. In the to bring it back to drugs, in the mid 70s there was a series of Senate and other hearings on how the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA were surveilling people illegally in America. And one of the things that came out was this thing called Operation MK Ultra, where the CIA at one point in the 50s bought the world supply of LSD because they were looking for mind control drugs, and they started testing it on their agents, on unwitting people. They had this whole kind of archipelago of rogue scientists who were just dosing people with stuff, and they knew it didn't work, but they kept doing it. Like, all of this stuff came out, and people were like, wow, like, why should I trust the government? It can't do what it says it's going to do, and then it lies all the time. And that's proceeded apace. I mean, like, in every decade since the 70s, we've had at least one major scandal in the government where it turns out the government is lying. For me, one of the more recent ones, and Trump is a special case because he just lies. Everything he said, even if it was not advantageous, he would lie. He's like a weird sociopath that way. But under Obama, when Edward Snowden, revealed what was going on under Obama, who had said, oh, we're getting rid of torture, we're getting rid of spying, we're getting rid of this. And Obama's response was like, well, I welcome a conversation about intelligence surveillance on Americans. And it's like, no, you don't. You were hiding it from people. So there's that. Biden has his problems. George Bush, the way that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were funded was, off budget for a long time, or in secret supplemental hearings, et cetera. Lots of fakery. And this, what happens when people don't trust, and I'm a libertarian. This is actually one of the biggest changes in my life. When I showed up at Reason, I started in 1993 in October. So I turned 60, I got engaged, and I'm celebrating 30 years at Reason Magazine. One of the biggest changes for me was it was just taken for granted. The way that you reduce the size, scope, and spending of government is by convincing people that the government is ineffective at best and is dissembling and lying at worst. And that's happened. Like, everybody agrees with the libertarian critique of government, but government is bigger than ever, and people want it to do more and more than ever. And that's something I didn't understand, 30 years ago. Because then, to go back to this kind of the article that I wrote, which is called, I think everyone agrees government is a hot mess, so why do we get more of it, or why do we want more of it? And it turns out it's very reliable that in low trust societies, people ask the government to regulate more and more parts of the economy and more parts of social life because they know the government is corrupt, but they're terrified of just free flow, what they consider free floating kind of chaos in every aspect of their lives.
On that correlation, I was reading that, and it occurred to me, could that be understood differently in the sense that, is it just that low trust societies are the societies that have a ton of problems, partly because they're low trust, and the societies that have a ton of pressing problems are the societies where people are like really urgently demanding solutions, because like they have runaway inflation, whatever, and then and the government is like who one demands solutions from, I guess.
And let me, before I get to that, that's a really interesting challenge, but it's also true that declines, it's not just the government. People have less media overall in the media. It's like newspapers, nobody believes them anymore. And for, sometimes for good reason, sometimes because people are becoming psychotic conspiracy theorists and whatnot. One thing to point out is that the declines in trust are almost everywhere in the world. So even the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, there's lower levels of trust than there were 50 years ago. So it's pretty much everywhere.
So it can't be a cause unique to America. It's got to be some kind of wider structural thing.
And this is, and to get to that question of like saying, okay, we need more, it's societies that have more problems are calling for, more urgent solutions. I would argue in the United States, broadly speaking, we have many fewer problems, like material resource problems, than we had 50 years ago. And I think, by any seriously objective measure, like, racism, sexism, homophobia, poverty, these are all lower than they were 50 years ago. And that part of what we're witnessing in America, and I think broadly defined kind of advanced economies, is that we have mainstreamed, and I think this is a good thing. This is how I try to turn it around. Like, what we are witnessing is the rise to ubiquity of a kind of true enforced individualism, where, again, you know, I mentioned like growing up in a certain time and place and social milieu where it's like, I wasn't supposed to have an existential crisis because, like, that's, you know, that's a luxury item. That's like a luxury belief. You know, my goal was to get through, you know, grammar school, high school, go to college if possible, and then get a job that would allow me to provide for my family and have some money left over on the weekends to enjoy myself. You know what? Like, when you reach a certain level of affluence, that goes out the window. We're all on. Abraham Maslow did not actually use a pyramid to talk about, you know, the hierarchy of needs, but, you know, we're all on the top of Maslow's pyramid. You know, there aren't any slaves anymore building the pyramids. We're all kind of on the top. We have enough food, enough education, enough spare time where we need to create meaning in our lives. We're working mostly at symbolic levels, and more people. And that's really hard. And we have not been trained. We have not been educated. We have not been...
well, it's a brand new problem. I mean, I guess it's always been a problem for the elite and the upper crust, the aristocracy. And who knows how well they've handled it, but it's never been a problem for the majority of people.
Right, and literally the majority of people on the planet in, I think it was 2016 or 17, the Brookings Institution, using UN data for the first time, said in human history, a majority of people on the planet were at middle class or higher income levels. So like when you look at local purchasing power, et cetera, it was something like 55% of humans on the planet were middle class. You know, we've seen massive declines in extreme poverty and regular poverty, but also, like, you know, what happens to middle class people, you know, like this, you when you're working your way up, you know, like, you know, the second or third generation in a wealthy family, that's where you start to see more artists and kind of philosophers. You know, it's like the first generation are working really hard so that their kids become doctors or lawyers.
It's the meaning of life is obvious. It's to get out of poverty,
and
get
to
from
provide for your kids.
Exactly.
And then your kids, you know, the doctors and lawyers, like doctors and lawyers on, you know, this is a ridiculous statement, I guess, on some level, but it's like they don't want their kids to be engineers and lawyers and doctors and accountants. They want their kids to be, you know, whoever they want to be, et cetera. And I think societally, in an interesting way, that's where we are, because, you know, I put a lot of trust in the work of an economist and sociologist at AEI named Scott Winship, and he's very clearly shown, I think, and convincingly, that when you look at after-tax income and after transfers, which is the way you would do it, you know, poverty in America, we actually did kind of win the war on poverty in terms of, like, nobody's starving, nobody's malnourished, you know, that we are doing extremely well. The middle class is doing well. And more of us, you know, more of us are going to college, more of us are living symbolic lives. And that, you know, that is really hard. I struggle with it, you know, and I mean, this is like, I get to work at a magazine where I get to push words around on a computer. But everybody is dealing with that on some level. All of the old verities, you know, this is where I'm a libertarian, but I'm kind of a Marxist in the sense of, you know, when Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto talked about how the great achievement, you know, and this in the very early pages, the great achievement of kind of industrialized society, bourgeois society, is, you know, that everything solid dissolves into air. And so, like, all of these fixed truths and social orders and hierarchies get thrown into jeopardy. So suddenly, you know, people like me, people like you, people like everybody is moving up and down much more than they had. And that means, like, you got to rationalize who you are, who you want to be, what your identity is. I would add, you know, when you were saying, like, you know, it used to be only the upper crust or, you know, aristocrats and stuff. Part of their, you know, crisis is that they no longer are secure in that, or suddenly, you know, people are showing up in their space, asserting themselves in a way that they never imagined. And that, that pisses them off. That's where a lot of decline narratives come from in the media. It's you don't hear anybody at Reason talking about how shitty it is to work in media compared to 50 years ago, because 50 years ago we were a small think magazine that didn't have as much influence or circulation. For us, it's all been good. But if you're at the New York Times, you're like, people don't take us as seriously, or we're not the only voice, that can open and close Broadway plays or movies or remove politicians.
Right.
It kind of sucks to be them.
And it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
Scott Winship, in your, I think you quote Scott Winship making a really fantastic point. People that say, millennials are the first generation not to enjoy their parents'
that are going to have a lower standard of living than their parents.
Yeah, that they that often the people who say that are people that had upper middle class parents.
Yeah.
So if you're starting at close to the very top, you're going to have a higher proportion of people that don't attain close to the very top and instead get one decile, right, like at the 80th percentile rather than the 90th percentile, and they perceive their life in relative terms. They didn't do as well as their parents, and they're the people
Elon
that
Musk's
end up.
Kids are not good. Here's a news flash. I don't know how to pronounce most of his kids' names.
They're going to backslide relative to their.
They're going to be poor relative to him.
And even the lesser case of someone that their parent makes $500,000 a year at a big, nice law firm.
Right.
Their kids might not all make $500,000 a year.
They're going to live fantastic lives, and they're going to be free from drudgery. They're going to basically want for nothing in the grand scheme of things. Gene Twenge, who you had on recently, who a decade or more ago, I think in the Atlantic, wrote a story about how millennials are falling behind, they're, in various ways. And she, her new book, Generations, I have my differences with her. I interviewed her after hearing her on your show, and I like the book Generations and
Me too.
everything.
I think it's her best,
She also, recently wrote an Atlantic story saying, millennials have caught up. So it's they're not going to have lower standards of living. Winship at one point uses data, again, after tax and transfers, that 70% of Americans at age 30 are doing better than their parents were at the same age, adjusted for inflation. And that figure has stuck for around 50 years. It used to be 90%, because if you were 30 in 1960, you were definitely doing better than your parents, because your parents were living during the Depression, and so things start to as everybody gets wealthier, it's harder to get to the top 1%. But in real terms, you're living a vastly different life.
Okay, so the one I thought caveat that came to my mind when I read this sort of optimistic narrative about economic progress is the price of college tuition just absolutely, eclipsing the
rate
whatever
of
wage,
general rate of inflation, et cetera. A couple things about that. One is there's still a massive wage premium to going to college, and people. You can split this all kinds of ways, and I have a doctorate. And I'm an English major all the way down. So I'm one of the problems, right? I got a bullshit degree that wouldn't amount to anything. But on average, going to college really increases your lifetime earnings by somewhere between after counting for the costs of it, between $250,000 to $1 million or whatever.
Which will then get in the future eaten away if you try to send your kids to college.
Yeah, maybe.
Right?
But here's the other thing is that tuition, what's interesting is tuition has actually been relatively flat for about the past decade or so. It's the other stuff. So it's room and board and things like that. I think and more people are going to college. Basically for the past 20 years, it's been right around 2/3 of graduates, of high school graduates, immediately go on to some kind of college, which suggests to me not that it's not getting more expensive, but that it is still affordable. Because if it was actually getting out of the reach of people, so it might just be in the same way, we pay more for TV than we did in the 70s when it was free, but it's something we're willing to pay for. I think it's not say everything is great and, there are no problems or anything like that, but college is still radically affordable. It's also what we're going through.
Because isn't that distorted by the fact that so many people are getting loans that are then guaranteed and don't have to be collected on because they can be
yeah, I mean, there's problems with the government issues virtually all student loans. There is a private market for it, but this was something that was changed a couple of decades ago, and it was done in the name of efficiency. It would reduce costs, et cetera, and it didn't work out. There's always unintended consequences. But, the student loan crisis, I think, has been misunderstood in the sense when you look at the average person who goes to college, and again, this isn't perfect, but, they graduate depending on the year, somewhere between 60 and 70% of students borrow something for college. Most of them, the median is around $30,000. And, when you look at the rates that they're paying, and there's a lot of ways to forestall that until you have more income, et cetera, it's basically like a car payment. And you could argue it would be better that kids, or graduates are paying, get out of college debt free and then are buying a car on top of, rent, et cetera. But it's not the backbreaking thing. These numbers get inflated by when people talk about $1.7 trillion in student loan debt, that always includes people who are going to medical school and law school and MBAs, et cetera. And it's that's just not right. When you look at the traditional undergraduate degree, and, I know you went to
Columbia.
Yeah. And you also did time at Juilliard, right? So
months.
These are among the most expensive universities, on the planet. There are other ways to go to college, and most of the benefit of a college degree accrues by going to college, not by going to Columbia or Juilliard. It's true, and this is actually something that's really interesting in the student loan data. African Americans tend to borrow more to go to college, and they go to more expensive schools on average. And there's an argument where looking at different subpopulations where if you're going to do targeted relief, there's ways to do that. But broadly speaking, you can go to college in an affordable way where you learn or you get the benefits of a college education, and it can scale to almost any budget.
Okay.
So, and again, the proof of that really is that, we continue to churn out college graduates. If it was fully unaffordable,
wouldn't fewer people go to college if it were a truly free market in lending, rather than a market that was distorted by the fact that these the half private, half public bodies buy up all the loans?
All colleges on a profound level are public universities now because they get so much money, either in terms of government grants for research or loans.
So would you agree fewer people would go to college in that context? And that would somewhat undermine your argument that the fact people are still going is the proof is in the pudding, right?
Yeah, well, I'm saying it's, the higher education market, and this is also, I'm a bad libertarian because in that article about trust and confidence, I say, libertarians, we have helped create a low trust society that then calls for more government. We need to kind of figure something out here. I'm also a bad libertarian in the sense that higher education, something like 80 or 85% of students go to public universities, and all of my degrees are from public universities. I don't get hot and bothered about I went to Rutgers in New Jersey, and it's they get about 17% of their operating budget or something from the state legislature. Not a lot, but maybe all colleges should be private. It would mean that the schools would generally be more expensive and fewer people would go. I think there's broad benefits to having lots of different colleges. There's 4,400 four-year colleges and universities, the vast majority of which are public or publicly assisted, the vast majority of which suck. I mean, only about 400 schools have any real entrance requirements or admission requirements. But I don't, this is not an area where I'm we need to destroy, publicly funded higher education. to your larger point, the price, it would be more expensive. There would be fewer schools if the state was not involved in higher ed.
Yeah.
It's also probable that the tuitions would be lower because, and this is a lot of research shows that every time the government says, okay, we're going to make more money available in the form of student loans or Pell Grants or whatever to universities raise their tuition because people can absorb the cost.
Okay, so I mean, on some level, if I were to think from first principles and sort of definitions, when I define trust, I think trust is the fact that I don't need to double check something, right? It's like I don't need to double check that someone has done the work that I asked them to do and isn't lying to me. I don't need to check their math. I know if I trust my accountant and I know them I know they're going to they're not going to pocket some on the edge. I don't have to check. And the fact that I don't have to check it lowers the transaction cost of just everything. That's why it's great to be in business
another
with
way of
people you
talking about
trust,
too
right?
is like reputation, where because the minute you said that, I realized I am the problem, because I was like, yeah, but Reagan, said about nuclear weapons,
Trust but verify. So I mean, this is one of the great bullshit, politician kind of phrases, because it's brilliant. This is what politicians do: is they don't acknowledge that there are any trade-offs in the world, and they say, I'm going to give you everything, right? And idiots fall for it. Trust but verify makes no sense. The hallmark of trust is that you don't have to verify. That's the whole reason that it is so useful and so productive. Right.
It also gets encoded in things like reputation, or, and we were talking about drugs, like, this is, I think my caffeine may either be kicking in or wearing off, but it's like, you do a little bit of something, and then like when you build up a little bit of trust or confidence in what it is, then you do a bigger dose. Or with a merchant or somebody, you do a small deal with them, and then like if that works out, then you do a bigger deal, et cetera. And part of this gets pulled into, the broad term reputation. So online merchants, and this is also something, I'm old enough to remember the emergence of online retail, where, it didn't exist. There was catalog, you could buy stuff by the mail. And that was also weird, where it's like, you would send an order to somebody with a check, and like you kind of didn't know if you were going to get anything back. So you wouldn't buy a house that way, but you might start with like some T-shirts or something like that, similar. To bring it back to this question of trust and confidence, Amazon, which dominates online retail, which is still under like 20% of all retail in America, but it's Amazon. They have when Gallup and other places look at, okay, what do you think about these different things? And it can be, Congress is always in like the single digits, but like Amazon, it's like 85% of people have a lot of trust and confidence in Amazon, because over time,
they've never missed.
Yeah, they show up, and when they do, like they're like, oh, here you go, or like, and now you can. They don't make
it hard to make you whole. They
and it's like you could bring back, you can drag anything you bought on Amazon, in your hands and throw it at a Whole Foods, and they'll give you a refund and stuff. Yeah. So you build up that reputation over time, and it does mean, like, every once in a while, like, probably you do want to check the math on your accountant. Not because you think they're cheating you, but also because people make mistakes, and you want to also know. I mean, this is, insurance agents, we don't really talk about them anymore, but they were famous for, maybe like every year, like this is, a public service announcement, like if you have auto insurance, every year, do a quick check out of Progressive Insurance or something, where they'll give you a bunch of different quotes to see if your insurance company isn't kind of like bumping you up without telling you, because that happens. But you get reputation matters in a trust society.
Yeah, and so my point is, like, if that's what trust is, then as journalists, why should we trust the government? Like, shouldn't we distrust? Shouldn't the rational position be to distrust?
Yeah, but until like people start, if they start delivering on certain promises that they made, or, for me, I'm not an anarchist. I'm, a small L libertarian, and I think I'm what sometimes gets called a classical liberal, coming out of the 19th century. I think government exists to do certain things that are easier to do or can rightfully be done at the societal level or collective level, but it should be much smaller than it is. Prior to, in 2019, the federal budget was something like $4.8 trillion. It's now consistently over $6 trillion, and it's probably never going to look back. I don't know what we're getting for that extra 50% that we've been, that we're spending from 4 years ago. Under Bush, George W. Bush, the federal budget went from about $2 trillion to over $4 trillion, or around $4 trillion. In an 8-year period, he increased overall spending by about 50%. And, it wasn't, that's a bender. It was all debt finance, too. That's another problem that has effects on economic growth. But it's like, I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal. This is like a career highlight. I got to write the anti-Bush editorial for the Wall Street Journal the day after Karl Rove wrote, like, Bush was the greatest president ever, even though he went out with like 20% approval ratings. And I was like, we went on this bender where we're spending twice as much, or not, 50% more money. And what do we have to show for it? Like, we don't have like a bunch of cars that parked in the yard or anything like that. And that kind of a digression, but there are times when you can trust politicians, I think, or trust governments. Like, you need to be able to trust the government, that that the police are not there to control you; they are to protect you. Things like that.
That brings me to
school education.
Yeah.
That the money is being spent on education and not on bullshit, including paying the pensions of teachers who retired 25 years ago, or to build new buildings, big new buildings for fewer and fewer students, things like that.
So in your piece, you mentioned that actually there's certain segments of society that retain pretty high trust, and those segments are the military, the police.
Yeah.
And I think you also mentioned like local media, local newspapers,
right,
as opposed to, or was it local government?
It's a local government people
Yeah.
have more trust and confidence in than state or federal. I was going to say foreign government. I don't know. But although I have to say, like, I lived for a variety of reasons, for a good, like, 20 years of my life in a small college town in Ohio, either full-time or part-time. And it was a small town that was run by relatively few people. And I came to really dislike the local government because, they would show up when I was shopping for groceries and things like that, and they were terrible. But, and, it's also true that certain charities do well, things like Amazon do well. But, the large point about the trust and confidence stuff and the way it plays out in reputation is that there are times when there are reversals. A company like Volkswagen, I think I bring this up in that article, but Volkswagen had a really strong reputation for being honest and fair. And, their cars sold at a premium, but they were really good cars, and they would take care of them if they were fucked up. And then some years ago, it turned out they were goosing the results of like how clean burning their diesel engines were. And, it turned out like they were just lying to people, and they got caught, and that hurts Volkswagen's reputation, and they need to do something to build it back up. The United Way, a major philanthropy, had a big scandal in the early part of the 21st century. The Catholic Church had a massive scandal about, sexual abuse among priests, and they haven't really addressed it, either within the United States or, at the global level. And that's, it's within institutions' power to turn things around if they want to. Government, and I point this out, in the 90s, there are moments where trust and confidence in like the federal government or state government or whatever go up. And in the 90s, as you know, there was a good economy, which helps everything, but also there was, there were a bunch of major pieces of legislation passed that were kind of effective. Things like NAFTA, things like welfare reform. And you know what? You saw bumps in people saying like, okay, yeah, I have more trust and confidence in the government that it's trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about libertarianism. You mentioned that you're now like 30 years at Reason.
Coming up, yeah.
It's amazing. And, the flagship libertarian magazine.
Yeah.
And you are in many ways the lead spokesman for libertarianism.
I would love to believe that. I don't think so. And especially because, if I'm the lead spokesman, we got a lot of work to do, so.
What has been the most surprising development in libertarianism from your viewpoint, say 30 years ago?
So a couple of things. One, like on a personal level, that insight that I really believed, and I think most libertarians still believe, like the way libertarians believe in, kind of maximizing individual freedom and liberty and autonomy and minimizing coercion, mostly through state government at various levels. And I really, really thought it was obvious, like the way that you shrink the size, scope, and spending of government is by showing that it either can't work that well, or it doesn't need to, or that it's corrupt and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, we won that argument. And that ultimately leads to more government. Like government at every level is spending more and doing more, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So that's a big reversal. One of the things that I'm actually really happy about, and I'm just thinking about the past 30 years, is how so many broadly libertarian issues or themes or mentality have really seeped into, I think, the common culture, and everything's always a battle, and like no victory is complete. I mentioned NAFTA. At the end of the 90s, there was a really big battle among, activists, intellectuals, governments, businesses about free trade. Mm-hmm. And the idea that, like, if you create more free trade, it's a win-win situation. And that won partly, because the NAFTA agreement, North American Free Trade Agreement, which was started under George H.W. Bush, but then it was completed under the Clinton-Gore administration. Mm-hmm. And, Al Gore famously, or, in its day, it was famous, he went on Larry King. And I realize now I'm like talking about like burlesque or vaudeville in the early 20th century or something. But like he went on the Larry King show on CNN, which still exists, but in a much smaller version. Larry King is dead. Al Gore, I think, is mostly missing, in action. And he debated H. Ross Perot, who was the reason why Bill Clinton got elected, because he pulled a lot of votes from George H.W. Bush. He had like 19%, the best third-party showing in, 100 years. And he debated him on NAFTA and on free trade. And, free trade won. Now people are revisiting that. I think it's mistaken. But so no victory is perfect. But when I look at things like the drug war, many, many more people are now saying, we need to give people more freedom. The drug war isn't working. It's not reducing drug use. And it causes all kinds of black market problems. It causes all kinds of issues. We're in the midst of the beginning of the end of the drug war. That's fantastic. I think people are more anti-war than they were certainly in 2000. And I think that's a good thing. I'm not an isolationist, but I am generally a non-interventionist. And I think that's kind of fantastic. I think people understand that the government doesn't need to kind of be in charge of everything and fewer things, that you can have things like internet commerce and you don't need the government to sign off on everything. The internet radically altered the ways that people understood they could voluntarily relate to one another and things like that. On big issues like school choice, like people recognize that it's probably better to give parents more choices rather than fewer choices. And that, kind of the old model of having, centrally controlled, even locally, but centrally controlled schools, it's probably better to just let more schools experiment and, help fund them to do that. I think more broadly on a cultural level, And to me, this is what matters most. I'm a big believer in what I call like lived liberty. It is so much easier to just be who you are now, for all of the, the rancid conversations about, gay and straight and trans and, black and white and, BIPOC and everything. It's just much easier to be the person that you are and to experiment with that. Like sometimes I talk about how people like David Bowie and Madonna and Prince were these kind of avatars of like, okay, what would happen if you could just explore who you want to be for a period of time without giving a shit? And not only are you free to do that, like you've thrown off internal shackles. So like, yeah, I'm going to dance like that. I'm going to dress like this. I'm going to have sex like this or eat what I want or whatever. But also society is like, yeah, you know what? Like, yeah, we should give people more space. To me, these are like kind of broad libertarian themes that I think have, really kind of bled into the common culture. And it doesn't solve everything, but in general, I think it's easier to live the way you want to now than it was certainly 50 years ago.
I think about personal freedom, and I just had Eric Kaufman on. We were talking about this subject, like which aspects of freedom lead to happiness and which aspects don't. So like this notion that having a fluid identity that is like sort of constantly changing and searching, I think it may turn out that that's really not a particularly good path to happiness, because it's inherently unstable and searching and kind of potentially hedonistic in a way that doesn't tend to work out. But
I don't think that's what most people do. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. And if I may, there's a great anthropologist, academic anthropologist who mostly works as a brand consultant now and a business guy named Grant McCracken. And he wrote a book in the 90s, which was very influential to my thinking and to kind of the reason. I can only speak for myself, but he wrote a book called Plenitude. And he pointed out that people don't escape a kind of social hierarchy or a tradition in order to have no tradition. They're exercising a right of exit to find the one that fits them better or to define it and create it. And I'm thinking also of, and his most recent book is called The Return of the Artisan. And it's about how, like good cooks and chefs didn't leave like giant kitchens in order to just cook whatever, like they create their own places. There's a rise in artisanal everything, which is kind of incredible and great. And it's so like, the model is kind of religion. Like people don't leave religion. Religious people don't leave the established church. They don't leave the Church of England in order to become atheists usually. They do it so they can worship God in the way that they see as more real and more authentic. Right. And so the question isn't like, are you going to live by a code of ethics or an identity? But it's like, do you have the freedom to choose, or does it get pushed on you? And then you're not allowed to leave. And this is where I think a lot of people who worry about kind of cultural chaos are wrong. And I take your point on an individual level. If you are just seeking, like the next thing, and you don't have a core identity, or you're not kind of trying to figure out where you go.
You wear like the same thing every time I've ever seen you. Like you are such actually a stable character. You are known as Nick Gillespie. He's wearing a leather jacket. He's dressed in all black. He's a libertarian. You actually have a very fixed identity, but it's one that you've chosen.
Right. So, when I started, if I may, I had gone through a goth phase, I guess in the like 80s a bit, but so like I wasn't uncomfortable wearing black, but I really started wearing black. I was picked to succeed my predecessor at Reason. I took over the magazine in 2000, and part of it was like, okay, I'm going to be the editor of a public a thought magazine, a politics and culture magazine like National Review or The Nation or Harper's or The Atlantic. And I was like, okay, well, I need to be a good figure or a spokesman. And I talked with my then wife, and who, the mother of my children, were on very good terms. And we were like, okay, well, let's think about this. And it's like, I knew like, okay, so like I'm a middle class white guy. I'm not going to dress super sharp. Like I'm not going to spend $5,000 on suits. I don't want to look like I'm just like a bad Catholic schoolboy with ill-fitting coats and a clip-on tie. And I was like, okay, this kind of look, I was like, this is memorable. It reflects who I am. And it also removes, and this is where to go to a deeper point, I think that you were implying, it's like, if I don't have to worry about what I'm wearing every day, then I have more time to kind of think new thoughts or to explore new ideas or to engage more new people. And that for me is what's important, because I don't, in a way, the kind of container of like what you look like, that, and again, people like David Bowie and Prince and Madonna are all great examples of like they changed the way they looked a lot. But for me, it's like it's very liberating to have a uniform, and because then it gives me more time to actually, I'm more interested in ideas, I'm more interested in experiences. Right. And I think all of us, I mean, to go back to, I think something we were talking about earlier, we need to, it would be great if we thought more openly about this. Like, if the process of education wasn't like, how do you get a good job and, this or that, or how do you sit still? But it's kind of, how do you develop the tools to kind of figure out who you want to be? I mean, it's like, I am like, I'm a generation removed from Hell's Kitchen when it was an Irish ghetto. My father grew up in Hell's Kitchen, and it's like I get to fucking, talk and think and work for a living, whatever. And it's like we need to help. More and more people are in that kind of situation. We need to equip our society where people know this is something that's worth thinking about and doing and working on, because we all need to build out our own traditions and our own sense of the past, et cetera. And just I'm blathering, I realize, but to throw in a little bit more, there's another great libertarian-ish thinker named Kevin Kelly, who was an early editor at Wired, and he's still cooking. And he's simultaneously, he believes in the need for tradition and ritual and everything. But he says, and I think it's totally true, a lot of the stuff that we inherited from our parents, like it's just played out. Like it doesn't make sense in our world. And that doesn't mean you don't have tradition or ritual or community, but like you gotta build it, you gotta reinvent it. And then you also have to recognize when like, okay, this isn't working anymore. It's time to start building a new settlement on the frontier.
Okay, on that note, I think we've been going for almost 2 hours. Nick Gillespie, thanks so much for coming on my show.
Thank you, Coleman.
Do you have anything to promote other than the documentary?
Reason in New York, we do a couple events a month, and people can check that out at reason.com/events. I also, and this is not simply to, kind of tongue bathe you in praise, but like you are one of the people that I moved back to New York. I was born in Brooklyn, grew up mostly in New Jersey, and then I like wandered the country, literally in a prison town in Texas, a small town in Ohio, LA, Philadelphia, Buffalo, and everywhere in between. I moved back to New York in 2018 because I was like, New York is the place to be, the density of just people and opportunities and shit that's going on. And like people like you, because how old are you?
27.
Yeah, it's like, I've been really impressed and enlivened by, your emergence. I met you very soon after coming here. Yep. And it's like you are the type of individual who is conscious of all of the different kind of tributaries that are make you yourself, but you remain an individual. And this is, I think we need more individualism in America, or in conversation, and not, like, oh, I'm a self-made man and I'm an island or something like that, but that people who are willing to challenge, the received categories, but then also, focus on like, how do I make my life kind of a work of art, or how do I keep improving? How do I keep iterating towards whatever is going to emerge as the authentic me. And so I think you've been doing that in a remarkable way. And
thank you, Nick.
Don't stop. I mean, like, because this is the other thing. I think before we got on, we were talking about this a little bit. In today's world, you can have the opportunity of building an audience for yourself and building a life and an identity and everything. But the really hard part is to build in critical feedback so that you don't just become the worst version of yourself or the cartoon version of what you start out to be. I don't know that I've done that, but you're helping to show what is possible and things like that. So I really appreciate your work and your presence and your friendship, if I may say.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. I feel the same way about you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. That's it for this episode of Conversations with Coleman, guys. As always, thanks for watching, and feel free to tell me what you think by reviewing the podcast, commenting on social media, or sending me an email. To check out my other social media platforms, click the cards you see on screen, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.